Hello Greenstylers, Cynthia here, and today I have a sewing tutorial for Greenstyle's new jogger pattern. This is the Brooklyn Jogger and it's part of our curvy fit line. For those of you familiar with the brassies, you'll find that the Brooklyn has a slimmer fit. Plus it has some really cool options such as the back bridge and the full-length inseam gusset, both of which I'll demonstrate on this video. We suggest bottom weight knits such as stretch French terry and ribbing for the ankle cuffs. Look for a fabric with at least 50% stretch for the main fabric and 75% stretch for the rib. Now let's take a look at the pieces you need to cut. The first thing you'll cut is the front pant piece. This is labeled P1. Cut on the inner pocket cut line if you're making pockets, and if not, cut on the outer cut line. If you've chosen the gusset option, you'll cut on the inner gusset cut line, and if no gusset, you'll cut on the outer cut line. Cut two front pieces as mirror images. Piece P to the back piece is what you'll use if you've chosen the no back bridge option. Again, cut on the inner inseam cut line if you've chosen the gusset, and cut two mirror images. If using the back bridge option, you'll use piece P3, the lower back, instead of piece P2. And you can use the gusset option with this back piece as well, so cut on the inner cut line for the gusset if you choose that option. And speaking of the back bridge, you'll need piece P4, the upper back, if you've chosen that option. Choose to cut either one piece on the fold or cut two pieces that will be stitched together later. If you've chosen the gusset option, you'll need piece P5. Again, either one long piece cut on the fold or two pieces that will be stitched together later. And if you're using cotton spandex French terry like I am, we can sing the curling blues together because it's a wonderful fabric, but oh my goodness, it loves to curl. For the pockets, you'll need two of piece P6, the pocket piece. This is the piece with the curved edge right there. You'll also need P7, the pocket lining. By the way, this is the piece that shows when worn. Cut one waistband, piece C1 on the fold, and you'll also need a piece of 2-inch wide elastic cut according to this chart, which is also on page 9 of the tutorial. For the ankle cuff option, cut two piece C2, the ankle cuff. Choose between the rib knit or self fabric cut line, and make sure you cut the shorter cuff cut line on the pant legs. Before beginning the pockets, make sure you cut along the curved pocket line on the pattern piece. Then iron a small strip about a 1/2 inch wide of lightweight interfacing to the edge. This will prevent the pocket from stretching out. Pin the pocket piece P6 to the front along that curved edge. Stitch using a stretch stitch or your serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now fold the pocket toward the back, and you can already see that you've created the nice front of the opening for your pocket, right where you'll put your hand in. At this point, you can give it a nice press and top stitch close to the edge to finish the front of that pocket opening. But I'll show you an extra step, which is understitching. This is just stitching the seam allowance to the inside layer of a garment. It's helpful here if you don't want to top stitch or if you just want to make doubly sure that your pocket doesn't show from the outside. Press the seam allowance toward the pocket and we'll stitch right here very close to that seam. Use a stretch stitch and stitch very close, about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam that you've created. You're stitching again on the pocket piece. This is going to be inside of the garment. Once again, fold the pocket toward the back and give it a nice press. And here's the understitching that's on the inside of the garment. You can already see how it's holding that pocket inside of the pant. And now you can top stitch along this edge if you'd like. I'll be skipping that step today. Now let's add the pocket lining. With both pieces laying right side down on your table, you'll slide the pocket lining onto the pocket, lining up this long curved edge. Pin the two pocket pieces together. Stitch the two pocket pieces together using a stretch stitch or your serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Fold the pocket bag toward the back. Once again, we'll line up the pocket with the top and side edges of the front piece, pin in place. Baste in place along these two edges. The next step is the optional back bridge, but if you're not making the back bridge, skip ahead to the gusset. And if you're also not making the gusset, then skip ahead to the side seams. If you cut the back bridge as two separate pieces, you'll attach the back bridge to the lower back first and then stitch the center crotch seam afterwards. It's basically the same as what I'm about to show, but just the order is flipped. But if you cut the back bridge piece as one on the fold as I did, you'll first need to stitch the two lower back pieces together at that back center crotch seam. So lay the two back pieces together like so and pin in place along this curved crotch seam. Use a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And while you're at it, go ahead and do the same for your two front pieces. Now all stitched up, you'll open up your lower back piece and you can begin to see exactly how the bridge will attach. Lay them both with right sides up on your table so that you can flip the bridge down onto the lower back piece. First, find the center of the bridge and align that point with the seam of the lower back piece. Pin or clip in place and use as many clips or pins as needed. Also, remember that when you're pinning or clipping at a curve, that you're aligning the fabrics at the 3/8 inch seam line. They won't align perfectly at the edges of the fabric, but they will align perfectly right at that seam line. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now press the seam toward the bridge piece and you can top stitch if you'd like. You'll be top stitching through the bridge fabric and the seam on the inside of the pant. Use a zigzag stitch, twin needle, or your cover stitch. And here's a close look at my top stitching. You can see that the stitching is on the bridge piece and not on the lower back. I've actually matched my thread to my fabric, but top stitching also gives you an opportunity for some fun contrasting thread. Also, you can see that the seam is pointed upward toward the bridge piece, and top stitching has created a nice flat, smooth finish on the inside. If you are making the optional gusset, skip ahead now to the section called Gusset, and if you're not making the gusset, continue here. Here's the back piece with bridge that we've just constructed. Now we're going to bring over our front piece. If you haven't already, you need to stitch up the front center crotch seam, and then we'll align the two pieces, the front and the back, at that center crotch seam and all the way down the legs to stitch up the inseam. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance, then skip ahead to side seams. Before attaching the gusset, make sure that you've stitched the front pieces and the back pieces at that inner crotch seam, and also now's a good time to verify that you cut along the gusset cut line. This will make your front and back pieces slightly more narrow than if you were constructing without the gusset. We'll begin by attaching the gusset to the back piece, so you can open out your back piece on your table with right side facing up. If your gusset is in two pieces, align the two pieces along this short edge with right sides together and stitch together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance and a stretch stitch or serger. Now place the gusset on the back pieces, lining up the center of the gusset with the center of the back with right sides together. Pin in place all the way down the legs. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then press the seam toward the outside and away from the gusset and top stitch with a zigzag twin needle or cover stitch. Lay the back piece now with gusset on your table with right sides facing up, and we'll attach the front piece to it. Lay your front piece with right side facing down and aligning the raw edges. Pin or clip the center seam of the front piece to the center of the gusset and pin and clip the legs all the way down. Once again, we'll stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And just like before, we'll press the seam away from the gusset and toward the pant leg, and top stitch if you like, using a zigzag, twin needle, or cover stitch. Also, I'd like to point out, if you prefer to press the seam toward the gusset and top stitch over the gusset, that is totally fine. In fact, one of my seams here is pressed and top stitched toward the gusset, while the other one is pressed and top stitched away from the gusset. And I will tell you, I've been wearing these pants for 2 days and haven't noticed a thing. Now let's turn those pants with right sides together, align and pin the outer side seams. You'll see the version with the gusset on the main screen and the version with the back bridge on the inset. Stitch with a serger or a stretch stitch and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Like to add grommets to your waistband, do that before my following steps. If you'd like to see a video on grommet installation, we have this video located on our channel, and I'll add the link to the description of this tutorial. Now grab your waistband piece and fold it in half so that right sides are touching, aligning the short ends. We'll pin in place and stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now fold the waistband in half, but this time with wrong sides touching. Now mark the quarter points on the top of the pants as well as on the waistband. We're going to slip the waistband over the pants with right sides touching, aligning the quarter points. The seam of the waistband will match up with the back center of the pants. When we stitch the waistband to the pants, we'll want to leave an opening in the back of 2 to 3 inches. You can use a couple of extra pins or clips back there to help you remember to leave that opening. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And now we'll use the opening that we left in the back of the waistband to thread our 2-inch wide elastic. Here's the cutting chart again in case you haven't cut your elastic yet. And don't worry if you find threading this elastic challenging. It's a really nice and comfortable elastic, but it can be a challenge to thread through. I think I worked for 3 solid minutes pulling my elastic through the waistband, so just take your time and be patient. It'll be worth it in the end. Once it's all the way through, overlap the ends, making sure that nothing twisted in the waistband, and you can either stitch in the shape of an X to secure those ends or stitch back and forth a couple of times with a zigzag stitch. Try it on to confirm that everything feels good, and then close up that opening using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. To make the ankle cuffs, we'll begin with the ankle cuff piece and fold it in half with right sides together. We'll stitch along the short end, and you can use a straight stitch as indicated in the tutorial in order to open up those seams and fold the ankle cuff in half. It'll give you a nice flat finish on the inside. I went ahead and stitched with my serger to show you another option. And in order to nest the seams next to each other, you can snip into that serger seam exactly halfway along the seam, just making sure to leave one of the needle threads intact. That way, when you fold the cuff in half, you can nest those 2 seams next to each other, so it won't be a big, bulky, thick seam against your ankle. Fold the cuff in half with wrong sides touching, and I like to mark one clip on the seam and then the other clip opposite the seam. The inner leg seam on the pant leg and opposite that seam as well. We'll match up the seam on the cuff with the inner leg seam on the pant. Stitch with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Since we need to stretch the cuff quite a bit, what I like to do is stretch it almost enough and then use my finger as an additional clip. When stretching cuffs or bands such as neck bands or arm bands, you always want to stretch the cuff or band almost enough so that the main fabric of the garment is almost stretched flat, but still slightly loose, because you never want to stretch the main garment. You always want to keep it nice and flat. And there you have it, a beautiful cuff at the bottom of your Brooklyn Joggers. To hem the bottom of your joggers, turn the bottom edge up 1 inch toward the wrong side and pin or clip in place. Now top stitch in place using a zigzag stitch, twin needle, or cover stitch machine. Congratulations, you are done. Wasn't the Brooklyn Jogger fun and easy? I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments. And please share all your Brooklyn Joggers with us. We can't wait to see what you've made. Use hashtag #GSBrooklynJogger across social media. We can't wait to see all your lovely makes. Until then, I'm Cynthia, wishing you happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle.